I'm Melissa.
And I'm Lee, and we are busy mums, company founders, and all-round early learning nerds. Welcome to our podcast, Growing Little Humans.
Kids aren't born with a user manual, so each week we'll try and cover many topics that you guys encounter and worry about each and every day while you're raising your little humans.
Dr. Claudine Habak is a cognitive neuroscientist with a PhD in neuropsychology and cognitive science, working on perception, cognition and well-being across the developmental lifespan, child to ageing. She focuses on how context and experience interact with emotional, cognitive function to facilitate learning, creativity and well-being, along with the role of empathy in student and educator relationships and wellness. She is an Associate Professor of Counselling, Special Education and Neuroscience at ECAE, where she co-founded the program in Educational Neuroscience.
Hi, Dr. Habak. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been really interested to have you on because brain development in young children 0 to 8 years is really critical to their development. And I think that perhaps we all don't understand how critical it is. Can you explain to us a little bit about how the brain develops in those first early years of life?
So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And in terms of children's brain development, what we see is that early on they're born with quite a large number of brain cells. And there are quite a few different things that happen at this stage of development. But what we really want to focus on, one of the aspects that's most important, is the myelination. So when we see changes in, abilities arising and things like that, it usually happens after myelination has happened, which is when the nerve fibers, in the brain and in other parts of the body as well, get wrapped in fat. It's a healthy type of fat. Okay, so that's why people say have your omega-3s, for example, because those are the building blocks for that. So that's when we start seeing things. But children's brains are actually capable of much more than what we're seeing. So it's just that's when the transmission of the information in the brain happens much faster, much more quickly. And the other thing that happens is that based on the experiences, the connections actually start to get pruned the same way a plant will grow stronger after we prune it a little bit. It'll grow in more strongly essentially. So a bit of pruning happens as well naturally, just based on the experiences that the child is having.
Okay,
so those are the main aspects.
Yeah, so that's really, really interesting that the pruning is based on their experiences.
Yeah.
So how can we, encourage and increase those experiences for children?
Okay, so basically let them, have rich experiences. So what is a rich experience? Mm-hmm. And it involves having different materials to interact with. Now, we don't want to clutter their environments, right? It's just about having materials that they can actually explore and interact with. So having something like a cardboard box is actually has much more opportunities for exploration than a fixed toy with a certain set of rules that they can't go beyond.
We always want to seem to buy children, toys all the time, but quite often it is just things like cardboard boxes and cooking utensils that they'll automatically kind of go towards instead of a toy.
Exactly, and that's because that's what allows the most space for exploration and
open-ended activities.
Exactly, so that's exactly what we want to do to encourage brain development. The other thing that people tend not to think of it, especially most people tend to focus on sort of, what are those academic skills? Mm-hmm. But really what we do want to develop most is what we call the life skills or the executive function skills, which are all controlled by, the entire brain works together as a whole, but we have the executive function skills that are mostly controlled by the frontal part of the brain here, the prefrontal cortex in particular. And that's actually got the longest developmental timeline compared to any other part.
So that develops first.
It starts developing early on. The whole brain starts developing early on, but this actually continues to develop until we're well into our late 20s, early 30s. Wow. So, and that's the part of the brain that basically helps us to plan and get organized and set goals. So you can imagine anything you want to achieve in terms of having a successful life needs planning and organization and setting goals and being able to achieve those goals. So those are the skills that we actually really want to develop in early childhood in particular, because then it carries us through other ages as well. So that's and examples of that. So any activity where children are given the opportunity to plan or to build an experience with you, instead of adults handing them an experience, asking them
it, yes.
exactly, or dictating it, exactly. So just giving them opportunities to be able to tell us what they want and what they think is needed for something.
Which is why learning through play is an important experience, because it's allowing them to explore and to move the direction of play in that, as they see fit.
Exactly. That's actually a great point in terms of moving it the way they see fit. So the principles of play are really being able to explore, being able to lead your own learning. So moving things in the way that you see fit and enjoying it. And and really what a lot of adults seem to think of play as this frivolous thing that's
They
just
sure do.
But it's actually, for children, it's actually work. It's the way they work
It's
and learn.
developmental.
It's the way they work and learn.
And we don't really see what they're capable of if we're planning it all for them. We don't really see what, like you said, their interests, but also if we've planned it for them, then we can't see they can't learn the process of planning themselves, or we don't really know what they're capable of because we've given them something for them to act out or to act on. So I think, that's really, really, really important to let them sort of lead the way and let them plan, and then stand in there and support and facilitate, but let them sort of,
Exactly.
lead the way.
But it's interesting too that just that whole process is actually what's assisting their brain development.
Yes.
Letting them do that planning and exploring, we as adults don't realise that's actually part of their brain development process.
Exactly. So that's in terms of brain development, brain development can't happen in a vacuum. So yes, people tend to think of, there are these fixed biological stages of development, but that's not at all the way development actually happens. It really is constant. There's this constant exchange with the environment and constant exchange with what's going on around us that helps to stimulate that brain development. So it's a two-way street. It doesn't, it's not the biology driving what children can do. It's the biology and the experiences that feed each other, and then we see these, life skills start to be formed.
And I think we often, obviously brain development is probably constantly ongoing, but I read somewhere recently, Dr. Habak, where it was saying that, a considerable amount of our entire brain development does happen in that 0 to 8 years, 0 to 5 years stage, and so that's why it is so important for us to provide stimulation during that time, so that because if you're not providing enough stimulation, your brain won't develop as much as it could if it was receiving the stimulation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. So what we see is that that's where the role of a truly artful teacher comes in, because then they can design these experiences for children that give them the space to really foster those aspects that we want. So 0 to 8 is one of the fastest periods of brain development and growth, and that's why the experiences are so important at that age, because it really, again, that two-way street comes in, and you really have that interaction between the fast biological aspect along with the nurturing environment coming in. So then you can really maximize that. And
definitely.
what's really interesting is that the second fastest period of development for the brain is during the teenage years.
Right.
So having that strong and supportive environment, positive environment to help the brain develop at the early ages also carries us through those teen years and
development.
through adulthood as well. And that's why it's so important to have those really rich play, well-planned play experiences so that kids can really thrive in that environment. And that gives them, that again, we want to build those life skills for life, right? So that's where we need to focus on those aspects of brain development.
Yeah.
Thanks for explaining that, because I know everyone always talks about, that when they're young, their mind's like a sponge, their brain's like a sponge.
Absolutely.
And you hear that and you think, okay, well, how so? So it's sort of, really explaining why that is, why they are really sponges at that time. And it's really interesting that you're talking about how that's going to follow on for their teenage years. And I think sometimes parents look at things as, these are the little younger years, then there's the teenage years and the adult years. So it's, we talk about it in education a lot,
absolutely.
building on the building blocks. It sounds like this is your foundation for your brain development, and then we're going to build on that and so forth.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not just your educational development that's important too, it's your social, emotional, cognitive, executive skills.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So that's exactly part of the executive skills or those life skills is also self-regulation. So when we think of child development, it really is, it's not academic skills. It really is, cognitive. So how do we develop their thinking, their language? Because it's really, you need to be able to express yourself. So the language aspect is very important. And also language expression actually helps the development of those executive functions and, those life skills that we were talking about, because there's a lot of planning and organization involved before you actually say something or do something.
And is that expressed like with the little ones with their frustration sometimes, because they can't express how they're actually feeling? So it's all working.
Exactly.
And impulsivity.
Exactly. Yes.
Impulsivity,
too.
Exactly. And that's why the emotional, and that's why we really focus on the 5 domains of development holistically. We have to make sure that they're all supported so that, like we said, thinking, we forgot physical, emotional, social, cultural. So all of those aspects are really important to support throughout.
Their coordination and everything, because, balance and fine motor skills with, learning to hold their pencils and those types of things.
Exactly.
It's amazing, actually.
So much is going on.
So much is going on.
It's all going on at the same time. And I think that because the physical aspect is so easy to see, and then children's first words, or second words or third and fourth sentences are always striking moments to people. But I think that really trying to remember that there are other aspects that are equally important that are less visible. So helping children, deal with their emotions, understand what emotions are. So most people, most families don't really talk about emotions very much, in our current world. It's just something that is, and it's actually very important. So that's, to help children identify emotions and when,
I'm
why
sad, I'm happy.
exactly. So you're crying. What does it mean? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? There can be different meanings to that outward expression. So it's important to help them identify that and then use that to help them self-regulate. And that's a huge aspect of those executive function skills that we want to support the development of for, brain development.
And I think sometimes parents need to say, I'm upset because of this, and then children get a lot more, they've seen the mentoring from their parents that it's okay to express how you're feeling and say how you feel. Like if you're just in a bad mood, nobody can read your mind. So I'm feeling grumpy because I didn't sleep well last night or something happened, so that they feel confident and to be able to express their emotions as well.
Absolutely, that's a great point. What happens, a lot of parents don't know how to express their emotions though, so sometimes it's I think
it's a hard one, isn't it?
Really understanding emotions is something, we all know what emotions are, but knowing how to work with them is something that really needs to be, that we need to learn. It's
really
difficult to...
By verbalising, it's really just teaching children that it's this is what mummy's feeling, and it's okay to say that, and
exactly.
Showing the way essentially.
Yes.
And so, is there just as much, like children obviously like growing up are having positive and negative experiences. So, do positive and negative equally impact on their brain development?
Absolutely. So, if unfortunately some children do face adverse events in childhood, and those adverse events can have a very strong negative impact. At the same time, where that negative happens, it can also, the positives can equally help. So a strong negative and a strong positive can both, work in the same way, essentially.
Okay.
For children, neglect has been shown to be quite, in some cases, worse than abuse in terms of effects on the brain, because of all the dimensions that are lacking in those cases. But certainly, we try to focus, especially if you're in the education sector like yourselves, you definitely want to focus on all the positive experiences you can possibly give these children, or all children really, because we often don't know what's going on at home. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so, Dr. Habak, are there any things that parents at home can be trying to do? I mean, obviously, in an early learning environment, teachers and educators are actively working to stimulate the children every day. But how about when the children are at home? Like, what can their parents be doing to just ensure that they're helping that brain development?
So I would talk to them, involve them in whatever the parents are doing. So if someone is cooking at home, and if a parent doesn't cook, then pull out a recipe book and cook something. You treat it as an experiment. If it works out, it works out.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be perfect. I personally, my cakes come out very hard, but they're not very edible. They're not very edible, but it's still an experience that children enjoy doing. Like I baked cakes with my kids. We didn't necessarily eat the cakes, but we did eat other meals that we prepared together.
Yeah.
So so certainly just anything that they can be involved and help with the planning, and they really do like to be involved. So unfortunately nowadays there is a lot of reliance on screens for children, and the evidence has been coming in that it does have a negative impact, definitely. And I think the main issue with that is that how long children spend on the screens, and that takes away from everything else that they could and should be experiencing to promote their brain development. They're really just doing one thing all the time without any social interactions.
Yeah.
So if they're spending, so it's too much time on the screen, if they're having a small amounts of time, is that having a positive impact, or is it?
Not necessarily. In early childhood,
No.
it's not. It's not necessarily having a positive impact at all, because some things in terms of assistive technology, if it's something that could help someone who has a difficulty with something, then yes, then it is positive. But in general, unless there's a real world aspect to that they can
Perhaps
relate
something
it to.
that's educationally stimulating them.
Yeah.
But even then, I'm sure, there's a limit. Because
Yes.
it doesn't involve human interaction, does it, when we're watching a screen?
No,
So you're not
exactly.
getting
So
that
and that's
perspective.
the biggest aspect is the social interaction.
Yeah.
But then there are things, for example, for a long time. So Sesame Street. So children watching an episode of Sesame Street actually, in the long run, seem to have beneficial effects. So again, small doses of the right kind of screen is.
And I
is,
think
yeah.
that kind of screen time, like the old school kind of
Sesame
screen
Street.
time, Sesame Street,
Yeah.
is a little bit different than the screen time now.
No.
That because it's much more interactive, isn't it? Like they'll get up and they'll be singing and dancing, whereas now they're kind of sitting on an iPad a little bit more, and it's I don't know, it's not.
Yeah.
Doesn't
So
seem
that
as-
And not as busy, I think. There was like one sort of thing going on in Sesame Street, and now there's sort of, when you see some of those screens, they're so busy and there's so much going on.
Yeah.
And you see little ones so focused and, hyper-focused and to try to get them away from that. I know when parents saying, okay, iPad time's over.
Yeah.
Then that's where there's a real struggle for them. So
It's a very different kind of stimulation. It's an overstimulation, essentially. Now, on the flip side of things, children getting absorbed into things, when children are absorbed in play and the type of constructive play that does help their brain development, and they say they'd like longer, then by all means, let them have longer in that type of exploratory interaction.
I guess if they're doing like a puzzle, or if they're constructing with blocks or what have you, they're actually almost like problem solving, aren't they?
Exactly.
Like their minds are actively having to address the next part of what they're doing.
Yeah.
and it's causing connections in the brain. So
Yeah. And I know in the classroom we would always have like a Lego area, and I'd always be saying, let's just leave that, and then tomorrow we can build on that some more. We'll put some paper or some pencils there so we can draw something, or maybe put like something different in there, and they would come in the morning and be like, whoa, there's like lemon in the middle of our, blocks, and what do you think this means? And then they'd go off on a whole different sort of tangent, depending on what their interests are and their curiosity.
Exactly. So if they're having an imaginary, walk through the jungle and having an adventure, then
leave it and don't build on it. Don't pack it up at the end of the day or at home. Let them
or ask them questions about where are you going next? Can I come with you? So I think that's what we call responsive engagement with the children, and just letting them lead. And so on, going with their interests.
Yeah. So, Dr. Habak, what I'm hearing from you with everything we've been discussing is that play-based learning is definitely the better style of interaction that we should be putting children into in these early stages.
Yes, well, actually, many of us would argue that it's the only type of learning that's needed.
We agree.
Or that should be going on. And actually not just in early childhood, it's the type of learning that should be going on for life as well. So, that can happen slowly. Some people are trying, so hopefully it'll get there.
So it's definitely something that when parents are seeking out somewhere to send their children in those younger years, they should be looking at what type of a curriculum it is. Because there's quite a lot out there that's more rote-based or...
Yes, and I think one of the aspects to really pay attention to is that you have these real trusting relationships within the environment, so that children really do feel comfortable. Because some places, some people say all the right things, but then the children still don't feel comfortable. So I think it's important to listen to our children and see what they have to say, because that really, and sometimes they don't know how to express it. They'll just say, I just don't want to, I don't want to do this, or I have a stomach ache. A lot of children will say that they have a stomach ache, I don't want to go to school. And they're not making it up. It's just that when it's the way our brain and bodies work together, when we're experiencing stress or worry or anxiousness, a lot of people do get a real stomach ache out of it. So, just listen to those experiences. And I think also, if a child is really enjoying something, just take the time to speak to the educator who's working with your child and see what those interests are and how you can have them going at home as well. One other thing that's really important, last one I think for now, is outdoor experiences. So really having as many opportunities as possible for children to be outdoors in nature with nature experiences. Just study after study is coming in on how important that is for all aspects of brain development, including mental health later on. So those aspects are, getting children and people outside. The number of studies showing innumerable benefits is really powerful.
So when the weather's nice, then we get outdoors as much as we can.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's really important just to remember that as parents, not as educators, but as parents, that basically every moment with your child is almost a learning experience. And I know I actually feel like when my kids were little that I would dumb things down too much. Thinking that I shouldn't use too big a words or, anything that's too complex. But I think in actual fact, it's probably the opposite, that you should just, keep
be yourself.
Be yourself and not try and dumb anything down because it's actually all a learning experience.
Exactly. I mean, there are some cultures, some tribal cultures in parts of Africa that, 1-year-olds will handle a machete.
Yes.
So, it can be very scary for others to see that, but they, at age 1, they're working with a machete alongside their parents. They know how to use it, and, so so children are definitely very capable of learning so many things. And like you said, no need to dumb it down. Just have maybe using simpler words until they learn the more complex words. But otherwise, just speaking to them the way we would to an adult,
And if they don't know, they'll ask why, because as an early years teacher, I had why. I lost the amount of count of how many whys I got in a day.
That's
but
right.
that's
True.
great. That's,
Yeah.
normal and it supports
Well,
their development.
And I think that's, an aspect that we experience as parents sometimes is a bit of frustration with, like, oh my gosh, another question. But really, or what are they doing now? Where are they climbing? But those are all exploratory behaviors and a sign that they're thinking and that they're exploring and finding out more about the world, which is, again, supporting their brain development. So we want them to do those things.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Habak. We've really enjoyed talking with you today, and I think we've probably all learnt a lot, and it's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been
Thanks
a
so
pleasure
much.
being here. Thank you.
And here come the legals. Our podcast is purely brought to you for educational and entertainment purposes. We are just two hectic mums, and we are certainly not licensed therapists.
This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of licensed or qualified professionals. And if you do need some help, please seek out some professional advice.